Howdy, this is Lemmy with RevZilla TV, here to talk to you today about how to adjust your clutch and clutch cable on your Harley Big Twin. So odds are pretty good if you're checking out this video right now, you're falling into one of two camps. You're either about to perform a little bit of scheduled maintenance that you're reading about in your owner's manual, or perhaps you have some sort of a shifting or a clutch problem and you're trying to start diagnosing the issue. Both are really great reasons to get into your clutch and make sure everything's adjusted to spec. The reason is that your clutch wears over time, and what you're going to do is keep things nice and snug, make sure your bike is performing to its peak in terms of shifting when you keep your clutch well adjusted. Now for those of you who have some sort of problem, if you're not getting great lever action at your clutch, or maybe your shifts are grinding or clunking, you're feeling some sort of an anomaly, you really do also want to start the diagnostic process by making sure your clutch and your clutch cable are adjusted correctly. Now the video we're going to show you here is on this 2014 lowrider, but you should probably know, regardless of what year your Big Twin is, the process is very, very similar. Whether you're riding a 4-speed, 5-speed, or 6-speed bike, the process is going to be very, very close regardless of what kind of motorcycle you're actually on. So it's going to cover you guys all the way back to really pre-war years. Very, very cool. Should be easy for most of you guys to follow along. Now in terms of the difficulty of the process, I'm going to call this a one bearder on our BSD, our beard scale of difficulty. It's not really all that difficult to get your clutch and your clutch cable adjusted up correctly. You're going to want to have a factory service manual, and as you can see here, just some very basic hand tools will get the job done. If after watching the video you still don't feel 100% confident, having a buddy along to sort of babysit you through the process might also be helpful as well. Now adjusting your clutch and clutch cable really are part and parcel. The two jobs are sort of intermeshed. It's really a three-part process. First, we're going to adjust a bunch of slack into the cable in order to make sure the cable has no effect on the clutch when we're actually adjusting it. The second part of things is actually adjusting the clutch itself. We get inside the derby cover, we adjust the clutch up. It's really a simple, not very scary process. I'll walk you through. And then once you've got that all buttoned back up, we move back up to the clutch cable and adjust that slack back out of it so we have good lever feel. It's really quite easy. Let's get started on things. Now the first thing I'm going to do to kick this off, as I had mentioned, is adjust some slack into the clutch cable. Now most Harley Davidsons that have a cable clutch are going to need to be adjusted at the adjuster. Now it's easy to find that. Follow your clutch cable down until you hit this accordion looking boot. Now on most of the bikes you're going to see it'll be somewhere on the front, usually strapped down to the frame somewhere. So you'll slide that boot up, and that boot is serving to protect the clutch adjuster mechanism from all the stuff that can hit it from the roadway. Water, salt, dirt, and just generally keep rust and muck at bay. So when we actually expose this thing here, it's kind of simple. What we need to do is collapse the cable housing that the cable actually pushes against, and that's a pretty easy process. I'm going to take a 1/2-inch wrench here and get on the adjuster itself, and taking a 9/16 wrench, I'm going to loosen up the jam nut here. Once I have the jam nut that holds the adjuster in place loose, I'm going to dial it all the way back, and you can just use your finger to do that. From there, what I'm going to do is collapse the cable. Now you'll know you're going in the right direction with the adjuster. As you feel the actual lever itself, you give it a squeeze, you'll notice more and more play being introduced. Now we want to introduce maximum play. We actually want to bottom this adjuster all the way out. And if you've done it correctly, you should be able to grab your lever and actually bottom it against your handlebars with absolutely no tension placed on the clutch whatsoever. So we're pretty much all set to rock and roll here. Now we're going to move to the actual clutch itself. So I'm going to pop off the derby cover, and as I'm doing this I actually wanted to bring something to your attention. I'm spinning off these bolts as I do this. Now I'm sliding these out of here. You'll notice that this bike is on the lift. You definitely don't need a lift to do this. We're doing it just to make life a little bit easier on our cameraman. However, because this bike is on a lift, you'll notice that it's straight up and down. What that means is all the primary fluid collects and it's sitting level right now. If you're working on your bike on your jiffy stand, like most of you are, I expect, remember that your primary will kind of face the ground a little bit, so it is possible that some of the fluid could leak out if you're overfilled. This is going to be important for those of you who are working on, say, a concrete garage floor or a driveway. If you don't want to botch up the surface you're working on, make sure you have a rag or something appropriate underneath to catch anything that comes out. Now as I take out this last bolt here, I'm going to spin this out, and I keep my hand on the derby cover to make sure it doesn't actually fall off. Let's set this stuff down here. And I'll pull that puppy off. Now you can see we actually have access to the guts right now. Here is your clutch pack itself. So let's take a look at some stuff in here. We'll talk about the actual adjustment process. Now when I'm doing this, I like to take an 11/16 wrench that's handling the jam nut. That's what we use on late model stuff. And then I also like an Allen key for this job. Normally I'm a big proponent of the Allen bits on an extension and a ratchet. However, in this case, I think I actually do want to use a key, and I'll show you why in just a moment. Using your Allen key and the actual clutch adjuster itself, lock that puppy in. Then you can take your wrench and loosen up the jam nut. Once you have the jam nut loose, this is actually pretty similar to the clutch cable, believe it or not. You can spin this thing out, and we're gonna take that jam nut all the way out so we have maximum adjustment room. Now from here, remove your Allen key. You're actually going to perform the adjustment, believe it or not, with your fingers. Your fingers are pretty sensitive, and they're definitely strong enough to do this job. In fact, they're actually going to help you because your fingers aren't as strong as a tool. What we're going to do is take the clutch adjuster and actually spin it in until it bottoms. You'll actually feel it bottom out against the clutch pushrod itself. Once we hit that bottoming point, again, you're not really cranking down this, just your fingertips is enough to get it to so you can feel where that thing's just starting to make contact. Once we get it at that point, what I like to do is take my Allen key and put it in. The reason I use a key here is because this is indexing. You can see right now this thing's pointed at about 6 o'clock. A good general starting point is half of a turn back out. Check out your factory service manual. They'll give you either a set back out point, like a half a turn, or you'll get a range, half to 3/4 of a turn. And a lot of that has to do with the wear of parts, how you like your clutch to feel. So sometimes you may go back and forth and adjust a couple times to get the thing feeling exactly how you like it. However, half of a turn is a pretty good safe bet on most 4, 5, and 6 speed setup. So I'm going to take this, as I mentioned, I'm going to back this out half a turn. Again, this is where the Allen key comes into play. You can see this is clocked at 6 o'clock, so what I'm going to do is back it off to 12 o'clock now. And from here, I'm going to run my jam nut back in just by hand. And now, holding the Allen key in place, I can retighten that jam nut up. Just get on there and snug down that jam nut. Now you don't have to kill the jam nut here. The torque really is not very necessary on this. It's just keeping the clutch adjuster from moving at all. So just snug should be fine for most of you guys. Now at this point, we're ready to reinstall the cover. One of the things I would like to chat with you about is the cover gasket. So this is a late model gasket. This thing is a silicone ring. They do really well. This is the one gasket that I will frequently reuse because oftentimes these things can seal for multiple uses. It's really not that difficult too if you wind up having a small leak here or there to just go back and replace the gasket. You don't even lose your fluid. So if you're going to chance it and reuse a gasket, this is one of the only times I say, go for it. Why not? However, in this situation, I'm actually going to elect to remove this gasket and I'm going to replace it with a James gasket. Similar function. It's going to work exactly like the HD piece, but you'll notice this looks significantly different than the factory OEM silicone piece. You should know that when you're getting aftermarket gaskets like this, a lot of times you will have something that looks very different, but it will function exactly the same. So I'm going to line up this gasket and get one of my bolts ready to rock and roll here. I'm going to run it through the gasket and the cover. And when I hang this thing, I'm going to use just my fingers to get these started. That's pretty important. And one of the other things I'm going to kind of talk about too as I'm starting to do this is when you're actually putting this thing on here, I think there's sort of an important way to get this on there, and that's I'm just starting everything by finger here just to get everything in place. I don't want to tear up the soft aluminum of the outer primary cover, but I think it's also important to remember too the sequence in which you're tightening these. You can see here on this late model bike we have a 5-bolt derby cover. So I like to actually treat these kind of like I treat the lug nuts on a car. Get everything run down a little bit and then sort of kind of bop around. Don't tighten everything next to each other, otherwise the cover doesn't draw on evenly. That's fairly important. So you can see here, I'm going to run all these down just till they're snug. Zip each one down here, not really applying much in the way of torque. Now, normally you'd be using a torque wrench on here. If you are not familiar with this task, you definitely want to use your factory torque spec and a torque wrench. I've done a lot of these over the years. I'm sure some of you folks have seen me do this before. I don't feel absolutely terrible about ignoring them because I've done so many. I don't think I'm going to crack anything up here. So I'm going to snug each of these down. As I mentioned too, work that star pattern out here. Now if you're working on an older bike with perhaps a 4 or 5 speed and you only have a 3-hole derby cover, same thing applies. You're just going to kind of bop around there, but because there's only 3 of them, you don't have to really worry about any type of a star pattern. Now at this point, this end of things is ready to rock and roll. The clutch is fully adjusted. To bring this thing home, what we're going to do is slide back up to the cable here, and I'm going to adjust that slack back out of it so we have a nice feeling lever. So moving my boot out of the way here, I'm going to start adjusting the cable housing back out. Now what I'm doing here is really taking the cable housing and separating it, making it longer again, giving the clutch cable inside something to get a little purchase against. You'll know you're doing this correctly as you back this out, you'll see the clutch lever start to swing out. You'll see it move away from the bars because it's naturally starting to move back out to its final resting place. So at this stage of the game, you want to start, as you get this thing backed out, you want to start feeling your clutch lever a little bit and making sure you have the right amount of play. I usually like to keep one hand on the adjuster and one hand on the lever, and what that lets me do is actually dial in just the right amount of play. So I feel like I'm getting close to where I need to be. Most bikes I'll set up with a 1/16 of an inch worth of play. Refer to your factory service manual, double check that spec, but typically 1/16 of an inch at the lever is a pretty good general guideline. Once I've got that thing in place, I take the jam nut, run it down just with my fingers. I grab my 1/2 inch and 9/16 wrench again, snug these babies down, leaving the adjuster in place. And they're not going to move too far, but still I like to go back and just double check again and make sure my play is good. It is still great on there. So what I'm going to do now is really to finish out is just move that gaiter back on to protect things. Now here's a little trick that might make your life a little bit easier. As these things get older, they can get kind of grabby, and you'll notice corrosion and stuff starting to form, rust, especially if you have an older clutch cable on your bike. So one of the things that can make your life simple is to take some silicone spray, spread the boot out just a little bit, and give a little shot of silicone up there. A little bit goes a long way. So with that little shot of silicone now, I'm going to have an easier time walking this gaiter back down onto things. So it'll jump over the first nut pretty easily, and when we get here to this second jam nut that this thing actually has to walk down over, you'll see they're a little bit tricky, but what the silicone is doing here is actually allowing the rubber to slide over the jam nut. Now this is keeping me also from tearing the rubber. You don't want to tear up that boot because that boot is what's serving to protect things. So you'll notice now I pop this thing into place. I've got it positioned correctly. We're pretty well set to fly on this. This is the correct way to adjust your clutch if you're rocking a Harley Big Twin. Now if you're interested in a little bit more information on this, click the info button. We have a pretty cool article sort of debating the merits of a cable style clutch like are found on most Harleys versus juice clutches. There's a little bit of history lesson there too, so if you're interested in how your clutch works or how they've developed over the years, that can be something that should fill in some of the gaps in your knowledge. If you get in a real bind and you do need some help, drop me a comment down there in the comments section if you're on YouTube, and I'll try and help you out immediately. If you need immediate assistance, get in touch with one of our gear geeks, 877-792-9455 by phone, or you can always drop us an email, cs@RevZilla.com, and we'll help walk you through your clutch adjustment process. I'm Lemmy, I'm out of here.